Have you ever wondered what it takes to be a modern med SLP? Well, today we get to find out as we talk to Brooke Richardson. Brooke is a medical speech language pathologist in Raleigh, North Carolina. She is a graduate of the medical SLP program at the University of Washington and has more than 12 years of experience treating adults with complex medical needs in the inpatient, acute, and outpatient settings. She has been instrumental in establishing respiratory muscle training programs in multiple hospitals and other healthcare settings, and has spoken internationally on RMT, respiratory muscle training. When she's not teaching or working at the hospital, Brooke enjoys spending quality time with her husband and daughter, drinking coffee, and traveling. She and I really connected on this show, and I'm sure you will too. Welcome to the Missing Link for SLPs podcast. Have you ever wished you could go back and tell your younger self a way to do something better, or something that you've learned, or gosh, just those words of wisdom that you would have loved to have known when you first started? That's what this series is all about. I am interviewing guests and we reflect back on their words of wisdom and what they didn't learn in grad school. I think you'll be surprised by each one of these episodes. So sit back, listen, and enjoy. Welcome to this episode of the Missing Link for SLPs podcast. We are here with one of our final What I Didn't Learn in Graduate School series, and we are here with Brooke Richardson. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
You and I have been trying to connect for like a year, and I think everything's lined up, and this is working out even better. I have followed you for a year since I first met you on the Modern Med SLP website and the work that you do. And so I'm really excited to have you on as a guest.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
So other than your bio, tell us who you are and what's your big why of being an SLP?
Yeah, I'm Brooke Richardson. I've been in acute care and general med SLP since 2009. I went through the med SLP master program at the University of Washington. I was actually in the first graduating class of that program, which makes me feel and sound very old. So ending up as an SLP was not a straight path for me. I met a lot of people who just knew they wanted to be an SLP their whole life. And I was definitely that little girl who was going to be a marine biologist. I moved from Colorado to Seattle to pursue my dream of being a marine biologist, and realized pretty quickly that seemed like a lot of work, a lot of schooling, and not a lot of money. And I thought, oh gosh, I don't know that I want to go to grad school. Well, isn't that ironic?
Yeah, yeah, that's what I was thinking.
But you know, when I ended up going to grad school, it was for something I was unquestionably passionate about, and it seemed like I could make a good career out of it. So it ended up being a good thing. But my older sister actually has a developmental disability. She has complete agenesis of the corpus callosum and atrophy of the lateral ventricles. And when I realized I no longer wanted to be a marine biologist, I started thinking, what do I want to do? And happened upon the speech and hearing sciences department and watched a few sessions in the student clinic. Realized immediately I didn't want to work with people with autism. Fell in love with people with aphasia, and became a major in speech and hearing, and stuck around for grad school.
That sounds exactly like my journey. I had something I was going to do before, observed, and like, no autism for me, definitely med SLP route.
Yes. I never even babysat as a kid. It just was not, I didn't have baby dolls.
No.
It was just not part of who I was. And so when I saw that you could work with adults and you could do medical, I've been a medical nerd my whole life. I was sold. So it's really funny how some of us just know right away, yes to this, no to that. and away
Mm-hmm.
we go.
Mm-hmm. And for those listening who are who are not that clear on, yes, this is where I want to go. You've done quite a bit of work, which is why I'm excited to talk with you. Quite a bit of work with new SLPs to the field. Have you found that SLPs find more direction the more they examine and are curious about what they enjoy doing?
I think generally so. And a lot of this is based on my experience with taking grad students in the hospital setting as well. So by the time people make it to my website, typically they know they want to be a Med SLP or they already are a Med SLP. But from my experience with grad students, I've had a few come into the hospital setting who go, nope, I definitely want to work with
Mm-hmm.
kids. Let's just kind of get through my hours. And then they go, by the end of their experience, they go, oh no, now I really don't know what I want to do because I was so convinced that I wanted to go down this one path, but I've seen what SLPs can do on the medical side. And now I'm not so sure. Can I have the best of both worlds once I leave grad school? Can I do both? So it's funny because sometimes people like you and I know for sure straight out the gate, it's med all the way. And some people know straight out the gate, it's pediatric education all the
Mm-hmm.
way. And then sometimes people do change their minds,
Mm-hmm.
or decide they really do want to try and do everything.
One of the beauties of our field is when I started, I was like, no children. I was like you, I didn't babysit or anything else like that. Had my own children, fell in love with my own children. Now I'm primarily, well, I'm a graduate professor now, but when I work, I work Friday, I carry clinic on Fridays, intensive care, acute care, and I get to sprinkle some pediatrics in the outpatient clinic. And now I do feel I have the best of both worlds. So our careers, yeah, they can be so dynamic and so lateral. Your website it's the Modern Med SLP. So you are heavy on the med, which is great because there are a lot of SLPs out there who are transitioning and want to have the best of both worlds, or they're shifting from the school into the med setting. Can you tell us about what makes your site unique?
Yeah. So, like you said, it's really focused on medical because I think that as a field, we do have that diversity of choice of working, gosh, even within the medical field, many, many different settings, not to mention expanding that out to pediatrics. So I think it's important if we want to become really, really skilled clinicians who have a good understanding of the evidence base to have a really focused approach to understanding what it is that we do and to commit to a lifetime of learning so that we can provide the best patient care. And I'm going to use the word patient since it's all medical, to provide the best patient care that we can, and understanding that the best patient care that we're providing tomorrow is going to look different than the best patient care we were providing 5-10 years ago. And that's okay. That's good. It's
It
good.
is.
We have to embrace and accept change and challenge. And that is a huge philosophy of mine, is always to embrace this change and this idea of momentum and moving forward, because that's what I would want if I were a patient or a consumer of healthcare. I want somebody who is keeping up to date, who is modern, who is connected with other med SLPs in this case, who share that same understanding, who don't want group think, who don't want to be told, this is how we do it. This is the recipe. There's no recipe for what we do. And we
Right.
really need to embrace critical thinking
Mm-hmm.
and accept those challenges. And that's, I think one of the really special parts of my website is my philosophy surrounding community with other SLPs and teaching SLPs how to fish so that we can all go out and feel confident in managing even the most complex, challenging patient cases, family situations, but still have that supportive community to go back to.
Mm-hmm. It's funny you use that, teach them how to fish, because I often use that quote at the beginning of my courses. And I think but I put SLP in there. So give an SLP a fish, feed her for a day, teach an SLP to how to fish, feed her for a lifetime, or him.
Right. And feed their patients for a lifetime, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's, you're feeding a whole lot of people if you're teaching an SLP how to fish. And that's critically important.
So before the podcast started, I asked you about the name of your website, the Modern Med SLP, and you gave a great reason how you came up with that name. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, it took a lot of thinking. I'm not great with coming up with names, so I'm not going to say this this came to me quickly, but I was really thinking of what my principles are, what my values are as a clinician and as an educator and as a citizen of the world, because I realized that nothing that I do is in a vacuum. Everything I do affects my family, affects my colleagues, affects my patients, affects the people who take my courses. So really trying to have this big global picture of what it is that I do and why I do it and how I want to help other SLPs to really thrive. And also, a lot of changes have happened in our world in the last couple of years. Obviously, we've had the COVID pandemic, but also things like George Floyd's murder. And I've been awoken to a new understanding of how important diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice are in the world, but also in our field for our clinicians, for our future clinicians, for our patients, and doing my own work in trying to remain modern and up to date and always moving forward with these guiding principles. So that's really very important to me, is this global community that we're all a part of, and making sure that everyone is invited to the table and that we're elevating voices that typically aren't heard. And whether that is somebody who looks like you, or who is older than you, or younger than you, or more experienced or less experienced, or comes from a different racial background or gender, we all are modern SLPs. We're modern med SLPs, and we're all a part of this modern community. So that's, in addition to keeping up to date on best practice and evidence and all of that, is really looking at this from a global perspective.
One of the things that I love about your website is you are heavy in case studies, and you work hard on connecting that link, kind of like the missing link for SLPs. That's why I came up with my name. It was the connection between classroom and clinic.
Yes.
And you do that on your website with a very unique approach. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. So my website has a la carte courses in really specialized areas that you can take, but I also have a membership that is based in case studies. And the whole goal of this is to really integrate what we learn in the classroom, or what we read in a journal article, or what we hear somebody talking about, or what we hear in a podcast, really taking that information and integrating it into a real world case study. So it's not just me. There are opportunities for other people to present their cases as well. So we're integrating this best evidence, but also not in a vacuum, because none of our patients beautifully fit that Broca's aphasia mold and have no other deficits, or perfectly fit the head and neck cancer mold and no other deficits, or have only a trach and no other deficits. So the case studies provide an evidence-based background, but also really infuse that clinical knowledge with a real live patient that we have treated. And it's not all about either saying, well, I nailed it. I managed that patient with no problem. That was easy peasy. It's about saying, it was really challenging for me to get this one physician on board. And I tried everything that I could. I advocated, I provide my rationale, but I just could not get this one physician on board. So we're talking about the case, but also the realities of being a modern med SLP, of being a clinician in the real world.
So you're integrating the knowledge with the skills as in the art of being an SLP. I tell my students it's not necessarily science because it's not A, B, C, D. It's the art of applying all of those things.
Exactly.
So you just mentioned self-advocacy. That's a hot topic nowadays. Do you have any recommendations on how SLPs can better advocate for themselves and our field?
Sure. It's not easy, and it is not something that ever stops, right? It's like I said, a commitment to providing the best patient care is a commitment to lifelong learning. And the same is true for advocacy, because I've worked full-time in 3 different hospitals with 3 very different work cultures, and have had to do varying degrees of advocating for either myself as an individual or my patients or my services. So I think it can be really helpful to understand that advocacy is rooted in understanding. People need to understand what it is we're advocating for and why we're advocating for it. But we also need to understand that trust is part of this. And trust is something that is earned. It's not necessarily given. And I think, especially in healthcare, we need to make sure that we're earning the trust of our colleagues in nursing and medicine and respiratory therapy, physical, occupational, and even sometimes other speech pathologists. So we need to make sure that we're earning trust by showing what we can do for the patient. Not, again, it's not a bragging, look what a great job I did for your patient today, but really showing through our actions and our words how we're helping this one individual patient. And then the more that the nurse or the physician sees this over and over and over again, they really start to trust you and respect you as an individual and as a practitioner. And as you continue to develop these relationships to earn people's trust and respect, if there are other ways that you need to pursue advocacy, you can. So you can say, you remember those 5 patients we worked together on with communication in the ICU? It would be really nice is if your nurses had access to a communication card so that they don't have to wait for me to come in within 24 to 48 hours. They have access to all of the tools that they need while they await a consult from speech pathology. What do you think about a cart like that? So you can advocate in these ways as well. It's not just about going up and giving a PowerPoint presentation, which also has its benefits, but really developing these important relationships with the people around us.
Mm-hmm. Excellent advice. How about burnout? I know that's also something that's a hot topic in this area. Do you speak much with burnout? Any words of advice there?
I have experienced burnout for the first time in my career because of the COVID pandemic. In February, March of 2020, my hospital hadn't seen its first patient with COVID yet. And I felt very much this calling to go in and work with these patients and to provide them the best care possible. I don't know, I felt invigorated, I guess. I'm not sure what the right word is, but I really felt compelled to go in and help these patients. And as time has gone on, of course, I still help these patients, just like I help all of my other patients. But seeing how healthcare continues to change, it's changed a lot in the 13 years I've been in the hospital systems. Seeing how it's continued to change and how little control I have over that has been very, very eye-opening. And So I do admit that I've experienced burnout in the last couple of years, and I never, ever, ever thought that I would experience that. And here we are. So I think recognizing that you are feeling burned out and knowing what burnout looks like to you is different than what it might look like to the next person. And so really acknowledging there's no shame in being burned out. And
No.
I think sometimes we feel like there's shame in it. And I think acknowledging, I've been sleeping a lot more, or I've been more short-tempered, or I've been eating too much, or I've not been eating enough, or I'm not exercising, or I just feel like I'm going through the motions when I'm working with my patients. Whatever burnout looks like to you, recognizing that maybe that's what it is. And if you are going through burnout, you can try a couple of different things. I'm no expert in this myself, but you can try I think it's called the 3 Good Things. It's from Brian Sexton at Duke. He's very good about resilience in healthcare workers. So 3 good things can be really beneficial. I even do that with my 7-year-old when she's had a bad day at school. So recognizing 3 good things that happened to you that day, they could be tiny. It could be that you saw a rainbow. It could be something big, like I helped a person with aphasia communicate. It doesn't matter. 3 good things from that day, and either thinking about them and reflecting on them or writing them down. If you look up Brian Sexton's work, he has more information on that. And that's really important. And also, if you think that you need support from a mental health perspective, whether it is seeing a counselor or a psychiatrist for medications, do that. If you feel like you need a support group, even if it's not a technical support group, but a community of people who you trust to talk things through and who have also maybe experienced burnout or who have maybe successfully managed their burnout, maybe find that group. Maybe it's another group of SLPs. Maybe it's a group of nurses. It could be anybody, but find your people and do what works for you. What works for me does not work for everybody. But really, again, identifying what burnout is for you, what you would like to change, and figure out ways that work for you that would make that better.
I was part of a podcast. I do the podcasting for Minnesota Speech and Language Hearing Association. I moderate their group. And we had this guest come on one time, and she talked about burnout versus being overwhelmed. And she said a very important identifying feature is when you leave and go away on a trip and you have a wonderful time and you come back, if you're ready to step into your job again and you're like, oh gosh, that was great, let's go, I'm ready for Monday, then you're overwhelmed and needed the break. But if you come back and you've got the Sunday night squiggies where you're like, I do not want to go to work, then it's more likely burnout.
Interesting.
And yeah, I thought that was a good differentiation. And, you said earlier when COVID hit, I just wanted to go. And you and I, and I'm sure many of our listeners share the same passion for the Med SLP work we do. We're like, this is what we do. This is why we do it. And sometimes when we are gung-ho about these things, for me, it's all problem solving and a puzzle. I mean, every day is a new puzzle for me to figure out. I can let those boundaries blur a little bit, and I give away too much of my time and energy. And then I realize, whoops, I'm getting burned out.
Yes.
And so that's when you're like, okay, I'm on the path to being burned out, or I am burned out. And that's where those techniques like Brian Sexton is like, the 3 good things, many resources out there, and establishing boundaries. And so good discussions.
Yes. And boundaries are things that I'm not great at, but I've been working on improving them. And I think recognizing that boundaries can change over time, and it's okay to establish new boundaries and to maybe make your boundary a little more fluid with this person, but a little bit more rigid with that person, and understanding that people don't always receive boundaries well either. So if you haven't established boundaries before and you start to establish them, you might feel a little bit of resistance from somebody, maybe like an employer, and really recognizing that establishing boundaries is not easy, but it's very, very important. And to just be true to yourself and do the best that you can and do what you need to do.
And that's where that advocacy piece comes in. Sometimes
Absolutely.
it's self-advocacy. I worked at a spot one time where I carried a high percentage of the evaluations. Like probably 82% of my caseload was evaluations, which was great, except everybody else was doing 3 or 4%.
Wow.
And that's the way it rolled out. It was supposed to be around 30%, and it just edged up. And this was a while ago, but I was talking with my boss, and hey, we need to. You can burn me out, and I wasn't getting the response. And my teammates then were like, as a department, here's what's going well, here's what's not going so well, and here's some solutions. So sometimes when, being able to advocate for yourself so you don't get burned out is just something you don't learn in grad school, right?
Oh, no. And I think it's funny to think back on what you don't learn in grad school. There's a lot that we do learn, and there's a lot that we don't. And that's normal. No diss on grad school here. We can't learn everything we need to know in grad school. I can't learn everything I need to know in my entire career.
Right.
But also I think for me, I ironically have been cleaning out my home office and trying to get rid of old papers and things, and found old notes from grad school. And one of them was on expiratory muscle strength training, which I teach courses on, but I could have sworn up and down that I never heard a word about that muscle training. And here I go. I see a couple of different lectures where maybe it wasn't the focus of the lecture, but I definitely saw some of the devices and I went, ooh. But, we prioritize. Our brain has to prioritize. We cannot absorb all of the information.
Right.
And also, if you would have told me in grad school that I would experience burnout, I would have gone, yeah, right, doesn't apply. And
because I love my job. I love what I do.
Right. Like I said, in February of 2020, if you would have told me I would have burned out, I would have said, yeah, no. I love what I do. I'm excited for this. And here we are. So I think that's kind of one of the funny things about learning, not just in grad school, but in life, is our brain compartmentalizes things and decides what to do with it without us really, really knowing that.
Well, that's the conscious and subconscious, and learning how to deal with and bring to the surface the subconscious processes that we have going on behind the scenes that lead to those blurred boundaries and the burnout and things like that, which also leads to imposter syndrome. And I know you have some thoughts on that.
Oh, yes. I experience imposter syndrome. Maybe not every day, but I do experience it in fits and spurts. I mean, even being invited to be on a podcast it kind of hits at my imposter syndrome a little bit there, because I think, well, why would anybody want to hear what I have to say? Or I don't necessarily know any more about X, Y, and Z than anybody else. And so that I get imposter syndrome in that way from my teaching and sort of, I guess, podcast guest perspective, putting out a website. Why would anybody want to listen to me? I mean, I get imposter syndrome there too. And it took a long time for me to get over the really big bits of imposter syndrome with my everyday patient care. So I'll tell you that for example, laryngectomy is not a patient population I work with very much. I haven't changed a TEP in years. I'm sure they've changed a lot since the last time I ever laid eyes on one. So I would definitely have imposter syndrome if somebody wanted me to come in and give a talk on something like, I don't know, laryngectomy management, because I can talk to you about it very, very vaguely for acute care, but definitely not anything more in depth. But I'll get imposter syndrome with sometimes working with somebody with a really challenging aphasia, where I go, ooh, it doesn't really fit into any box very neatly. And gosh, this person really feels like I'm the best person for the job. And oh, am I? So there are these times where I have these really challenging cases where I can start to question myself a little bit, but then I have to realize that I am more knowledgeable than the patient's family member, for example, or the neurologist when it comes to treating aphasia, and really trying to sort of build back up my own self-confidence, I guess, in a way, right? Is acknowledging that there are limitations in my knowledge and skills. We all have limitations in our knowledge and skills. I don't care how long you've been practicing. We all have them. So acknowledging that, accepting it, working to improve your knowledge and skills in that area, and then accepting that, moving forward and saying, okay, I am worthy of treating this very challenging patient. I am the best person for this job. I am the best person available for this patient. I maybe will lean on a mentor or my resources. I'm going to do the best job that I can for this patient.
And shifting that negative mindset to a positive mindset.
Yes.
Yes. I think imposter syndrome is not necessarily, it can be tied to confidence, but it's also this chronic little SLP sitting on your shoulder that says, you can't do this and, you're faking it. But turning to the other SLP on the other shoulder, no matter what level of skill you have, maybe you're in grad school and you're going to start your first student because you're in your first semester and your clinical director just assigned you somebody. You still have the courses or the start of the courses or the start of something to confidently step forward and turn and listen to the positive SLP comments and change that neuroplasticity pathway.
Yes, definitely. And I wonder if imposter syndrome is more common in people who are high achievers and who are actually very, very knowledgeable and very skilled, because I think there's a real danger in being overly confident, right? I mean, how many times have I said on this show already that we need to constantly be learning and I'm imperfect? And, when we're a student or a clinician or just a member of this planet that we live on and we think we know everything, that's dangerous to me. I think imposter syndrome, as uncomfortable and unpleasant as it is, if we can acknowledge that having imposter syndrome ironically means that we're probably pretty darn good at what we're doing, and not letting it paralyze us.
Right.
I think, I don't know. I think that's something that we should probably reflect on if we're experiencing imposter syndrome.
Well, it's funny you bring that up because research does show that people who are challenged with imposter syndrome, most of us are women, and over 80% of us are considered high achievers.
That sounds a lot like SLPs.
It does. It does. And we're also competitive. And so, and this is something I've seen change over the years. It used to be cutthroat. And it was you or another member in your cohort. And now mental wellness practice says, let's have a collaborative approach. Let's support one another. I did a course last night where it was on team building, and the strength of an individual ties into correlates with the strength of a team. So the stronger an individual is, the stronger a team is. And so changing the competitive to a collaborative approach also helps, I think.
Yeah.
With imposter syndrome.
Yeah, I agree. And it's interesting because everybody on that team needs to be willing to do that. And I think that's one big challenge of working with human beings is, making sure that your team is cohesive and finding ways to make that happen so that no one person comes out as necessarily the leader. And I mean that in the way of the highest performer, the best, being perceived as thinking they're the best or being perceived as thinking they're the weakest. It's really, I think, a challenge for these teams, whether it's a team of 2 or 20, to really figure out how to distribute knowledge and skills while not making somebody feel any better or worse or less than.
So 2 questions. One of them is my very favorite question, and I'm rubbing my hands here because I did not let you know about this question beforehand. And you're like, oh, one of my favorite questions to ask is, what are some words of advice that someone gave you that you were glad you did not follow?
Oh, wow.
I get this response every time, but it provides and yields some of the best answers.
Words of advice that I'm glad I didn't follow. That's a hard one to answer when you're experiencing burnout.
Hard one to answer.
It is. That's a very, very hard one to answer. I mean, I can think of words of advice that I have followed or that I really did believe, and now I'm realizing they weren't true.
Share one of those with us.
Okay. So I was raised that if you love what you do, 2 things happen. The money will follow and you'll never work a day in your life. Okay. So I get the concept of if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. I love what I do. My career, my job gives me meaning and purpose and fulfillment in ways that I don't think every career could. However, there's still productivity standards, weekends and holidays and things like that. So
reality,
it's just sort of an interesting dichotomy, I guess. And if you do what you love, the money will follow. I mean, I have a career in healthcare and I have a stable job, but I think that advice was perhaps a little bit misleading to a very naive person growing up in a very prosperous time in America. So
I am so glad you said that, because I have heard that often. If you love what you do, this, and all of this glorious red velvet carpet is going to roll out in front of you. And when I get students that come to Fresh SLP or come to my stuff, they're like, wait a minute, my carpet didn't roll out. Something's wrong with me. Something I'm doing. And it's like, no, this is a mindset that, while it has some elements of truth to it, is a mindset that really isn't realistic and can set people up to fail.
Absolutely.
So on that piece then, what words of advice would you recommend to somebody in graduate school?
I would say give yourself as much grace as you can. You're learning a lot, and you're not only learning about aphasia and dysarthria and dysphagia, you are learning about a lot of professional issues that extend far beyond textbooks. You're learning how to integrate your textbook knowledge with real patients. You're learning how to interact with distraught family members, with members of the medical team who may or may not be receptive to what it is you have to say. You are learning to have different styles of supervision as you're going through your clinical placements. You're going to learn how to interact with people and what your learning style is and what your feedback style is as you go into your clinical fellowship. And you're going to take these experiences for the rest of your career. And even if you don't have the best experience in one setting or with one supervisor, there is still a lesson to take away from that. There is still some nugget of information or something that you learned, something that you improved about yourself as a result of that experience that was maybe not overall positive. Of course, your positive experiences, you'll take those along with you too. But give yourself grace. Know that learning begins the day that you graduate.
All right. What is one thing you did not learn in graduate school?
Gosh, what is one thing I didn't learn in graduate school? There's so many. Okay. I didn't truly learn in graduate school how to be a part of a truly supportive community.
So go find those communities.
Go find them and do not leave them.
Right? They can find one at the Modern Med SLP and at Fresh SLP. Thank you for your time today, Brooke.
Thank you so much. It was great to be here.
I hope today's conversation has created some aha moments for you and motivated you to become a better SLP, continuing to connect some of those missing links between what you know and how to use that knowledge. Thank you for downloading the Missing Link for SLP's podcast, and if you enjoyed the show, I'd love you to subscribe, rate it, and leave a short review. Also, please share an episode with a friend. Together we can raise awareness and help more SLPs find and connect those missing links and get the information needed to help them feel confident in their patient care every step of the way. Follow me on Instagram and join the Fresh SLP community on Facebook. Show notes are always available, so come learn more at freshslp.com. Let's make those connections. You got this.